Pleasant afternoon, comrades. And first, I'd like to thank the Socialist Alliance and Resistance for allowing me to come to Australia to be able to impart, share what is happening in the Philippines. I know everybody is very much concerned, as is the rest of the world, with respect to the human rights crisis, no, which has made human life was already cheap in the Philippines before Duterte, but this situation has actually made life human life much cheaper there, and we badly need the support, especially of progressive groups and individuals all over the world, to stop the mass killings, but also is using this curtailment of the most basic human rights as a tool towards authoritarian rule, and this is what we must also prevent. My task thank you for the opportunity for me to share what is happening. No? So President Duterte actually became the 16th president of the Philippines, no? In June 30 of 2016, and this is the 5th election since the very well-known 1986 People Power Revolution, Ellecer. And he won on the strength of a very simple message, and that is basically three cornerstone items, no? Is ending the pervasiveness of drugs, criminality, as well as corruption in the Philippines. No promises on the essential services, the democratization of the foundations of a life of dignity, economic, social, and cultural rights. But to understand his popularity, why there is seemingly much support for him now, is to go back to that very revolution. No? Of course, we're all probably aware of the massive human rights violations that took place during the Marcos dictatorship. Of course, the left was very central in terms of resisting this mass human rights violator that is Marcos, and of course his cronies, and of course the wife of the slain Senator Benigno Aquino became the first president after Marcos. This popular revolt, of course, is not really what was the needle that broke the camel's back, so to speak. It was decades of really the struggles of ordinary people, this revolution actually was hijacked by the yellow forces, or those who have come to represent the neoliberal regimes that came after Marcos. So we have to look at things from a structural perspective, no? The prevailing conditions before Duterte. So Philippines is not a poor country, but it is a country with many poor people. The Ellecer Revolution merely restored the pre-martial law nominal democracy, power transfer from one elite to another. So it was the 30 years of elite democratic rule by the 1/10 of the 1%, or 50 oligarch families, our main problem in the Philippines, having had captured Philippine politics and economy, and those who have refused to deliver on the promise of EDSA, democratization of essential services, the equitable redistribution of the nation's wealth, and the radical social reforms that were needed. So it's actually a system, we have a non-existent political party system in the Philippines. No? It's a system based on transactional and patronage politics and as a means to amass wealth. There's a strong, has always been strong behind the scenes US influence. We used to be, and perhaps we could also say that we still are a US colony. Philippines has always been strategic for the US in its geopolitical hegemony and its assertion of authority in our part of the world. And this poverty-inducing system's survival in the Philippines is dependent on keeping the vast majority poor and uninformed. And more than 26 million Filipinos are under the poverty line. And so that oppressive and exploitative setup continued after the time of Marcos. The majority of Filipinos not having the ability to question the behavior of authorities, systemic corruption at all levels of governance, and of course debt servicing, which has compromised the delivery of the most essential services and opportunities. Unemployment rates are one of the worst in Asia. Our economy is very dependent on the remittances of presumably 12 million, over one-tenth of the Philippine population, migrant workers, no? And our economy floats on that. So our economy would simply collapse without their remittances. And of course, important to note is that the dictatorship years gave birth to a vibrant human rights movement, very much connected to the left, the struggle of the basic sectors in the Philippines. Okay, so that promised representative democracy, more responsive to the masses, were never materialized. And so, what one of our key leaders, if some of you might know him, Dr. Walden Bello, calls it the EDSA Republic, the various regimes after EDSA up to the last one, from mother to son. The last president of the Philippines before Duterte was actually the son of the first president after Marcos, Corazon Aquino. So Noynoy Aquino represented the last of the administrations of this EDSA Republic, or the elite liberal democratic regimes before Duterte. So I quote Dr. Walden Bello, instead of democracy, the EDSA Republic gave them oligarchy and massive corruption. Instead of security, it generated rampant criminality. Instead of providing opportunity, it deepened poverty and inequality. Instead of affirming the dignity of the poor and marginalized, it robbed them of it. The hypocritical democracy of the EDSA Republic is the principal reason why they are willing to give Duterte's authoritarian project a chance. This is the spectacular failure of the EDSA Republic. And then a second reason why Filipinos actually support President Duterte is that if you think about it, the most affected by his two foremost priorities, the issues of drugs and crime, are also the most impoverished communities in the Philippines. If a mother coming from an urban poor area experiences a crime, then and reports to the police in most cases will do nothing and even try to exploit her. And that is why so many Filipinos disillusioned with the inoperable anti-poor criminal justice system in the Philippines have come to actually subscribe to this alternative justice dispensation system, Davao forged, that this violent president has to offer. So again, the limits of elite democracy, which actually paved the way for the rise of this strongman. So Duterte early on actually inspired the police, armed sections of the left, and ordinary citizens to engage in the killings. He created the conditions through public pronouncements, sustained public pronouncements, promising police protection from litigation, offering bounties, actually, of vigilante killings in the Philippines stems from this implicit license to kill scheme. Human rights scholars call this situation actually encounter killings or police vigilantism. No? It's an open secret in the Philippines that police killings are closely linked to the vigilante killings. It's a situation where President Duterte and other officials of the land are able to dissociate themselves legally from the killings, but at the same time claim them as accomplishments of the state. Okay, to borrow the words of the UN Special Rapporteur on extrajudicial killings, Agnes Calamard, it is a multifold human rights crisis. Just imagine you have 1.2 million surrenderies, actually drug dependents coming out in the open. No, what makes it even worse are the forced quotas for police officials. No, if they do not produce the required results, they are actually either sacked or sent to riskier areas of operations, no? Like the southern part of the Philippines, Mindanao. And the reward systems actually stemming from the Philippine National Police Headquarters. You have our 44,000 barangays, or the smallest political governance unit in the Philippines, were all forced to produce barangay drug suspect lists. These surrenderies are forced to actually sign promissory notes saying that they will stop using drugs. No? You now have drop boxes, report drop boxes in these barangays. So you can actually, if you have a beef to settle with someone, you can arbitrarily just drop his or her name there. So you have stickers, drug-free households certification stickers. And of course, the extreme overcongestion of our places of deprivation of liberty, jails and prisons. You have mayors left up to their own devices, actually allowed to employ archaic methods of shaming, no? Walks of shame, and even organizing the community to do serenades in front of the houses of drug suspects. In spite of the Philippines having a very good anti-torture law, which has been in place in 2009. And by the way, only having one conviction since then.
Sorry, I think the screen isn't quite up to where you are.
Oh, sorry,
No,
I forgot.
I'm just saying, where
Okay.
should we be up to?
Okay, yes, the multifold human rights crisis.
This one?
I'm sorry, I forgot.
No, that's all right.
Yeah.
You're going
Just
back.
this one? Yeah.
Yeah, down. Yes, and then another one. Yeah.
One
Okay.
more? Or no?
And then another one, multifold. Yeah. Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry. Yeah, next. Yes, okay. Yeah, so there's that fought back excuse always employed by the police now. They fought back, simply. No? And once the police start firing, there is a 98% kill rate. So actually, the situation, this war on drugs has actually worsened even the gravest forms of human rights violations. So more and more, there's a rise of that pattern. We have been documenting that instead of being immediately killed, drug suspects disappear first, and then later on surface dead, and having had found signs of having had been heavily tortured. No? Yeah, and the police are now taking advantage of this arrests for ransom. No? So not actually registering arrests, but actually, extorting families, no, for the release of their loved ones. You now have two prevailing sentiments amongst the Filipino people. Their safety, but also a feeling of insecurity. Of course, we all know that that feeling of safety is caused by the climate of fear, artificial. And if you see, of course, so many surrenderies in your barangay, and Filipinos living in urban poor areas because it's very hot in the Philippines, at night, before, they would go out because it's very hot in their homes. But now they all go inside because of the danger. And if you're from the middle class and you walk through the streets, then you'll definitely feel safer. So you have those two prevailing sentiments. But the majority of Filipinos actually are wary that they can possibly be falsely accused. But there's that on-the-ground demonstration already, and that visceral, instinctive feeling that what is happening is wrong. So the incitement to violence and hate by President Duterte, and this is, sorry. Yes, and this is just a few, no? The difference between the previous administration, which was repressive as well, is that they actually were unable or unwilling to police their ranks. No? This administration is different. They even openly brag about it and get away with it with impunity. So this is his kill rhetoric, the kill language, no? Which is dehumanizing all of us, compromising our very core values, even our youngsters. Yeah. Next slide. Okay, so it's obvious that he has created that crisis, and he has defined a particular section of Philippine society worthy of elimination by dehumanizing them, describing them as inhuman, and even spreading myths about drug dependency in general. He has bloated the drug dependency figures in the Philippines, and actually claiming that the Philippines is a narco state. And we're actually far from it. The collateral damage line has been constantly used, actually. There have been many, including children, who have been killed, who were not even involved in drugs. So, yeah, it's okay. That will happen. There collateral damage to actually desensitize the public into acceptance. So you now have two wars in the Philippines. Martial law was declared in Mindanao. And over 2 months ago, May 24. And it's the war on drugs and the war on terrorism. And because he's bankrupt on real programs to address their root cause, of course, the lack of social justice, and the existence of widespread abject poverty. He opts for the militarist solution in Mindanao, and of course this the violent approach to the issue of drugs. No? And he is actually forcibly framing these two as being closely linked, no? Saying that terrorists are also supplying, are in cahoots with the drug lords and narco politicians in the Philippines. So framing it as narco terrorism. Okay, so just to give you the figures, and these are figures back in December 16. So this human rights crisis has sadly led to more than 6,000 widows or widowers, 15,000 children who have become fatherless or motherless, and 12,000 parents who have lost sons or daughters. And of course, the numbers have piled up since then. And these are just the documented ones. Okay, the battle of figures. Since January of this year, when international criticism came, the Philippine National Police stopped bragging about the killings. No, they started adjusting their figures. And a reputable, progressive media outfit, the Philippine Center for Investigative Journalism, made an in-depth study, on the government statistics and their adjusted ways of presenting these, and found blatant inconsistencies which have revealed a deliberate attempt to conceal the magnitude of the killings. And they found also that they have been manipulating drug use incidence figures in the Philippines. So 2 days ago, there was a spike in the killings again. Previously 30 to 50 a day, but just in just in 3 areas alone in the Philippines, you have a total of 65 killings. So so this is a most recent actually invitation to one of the public actions. Next slide, please. Okay, so what are the social costs? If this continues, this situation is actually desensitizing the public. Daily, you have media reports. And basically you have children playing Duterte games in our communities, running after each other. I will Duterte you, synonymous to I will kill you. You also have threatened to transfigure the mindsets of our entire policing establishment, transforming even the most honest, decent, law-abiding police officers into butchers. Now, we threaten to throw away all the human rights education and conscientization work that human rights organizations and the Commission on Human Rights has been doing. And to be honest, there's actually, we're the only country in our part of the world that has human rights affairs offices in both our AFP, Armed Forces of the Philippines, and Philippine National Police. And of course, the disregard for due process endangers everyone in Philippine society if the police acquire this habit for a long, long time. Okay, so this extrajudicial killings is actually the signature and defining character of this administration. It is the only one, and I repeat, the only one that is fully articulated and seriously implemented. He has no coherent socio-economic programs that have that promise to actually respond and to end the poverty-inducing system. And for many of us progressives in the Philippines, if this foremost right from which all other rights emanate from is blatantly disregarded, then we have serious doubts whether genuine change can take place. it's sad, no? A lot of, sorry to say, a lot of progressives, comrades in the Philippines, sadly, it's unfortunate what is happening, the extrajudicial killings, but yeah, he's okay with this program, but that for many of us is a wrong calculus, no? If it's about the right to life, there is no compromise. There should be no compromise at all. Yeah, so the interconnection between widespread abject poverty and the two resulting issues that he is prioritizing, it's clear that these are merely results over symptoms of a poverty, a deeper social problem. No? This poverty-inducing system has created a huge market of beaten down, impoverished, vulnerable individuals predisposed to become exploited into a life of crime and drug dependency. So there's a direct relationship between the decrease of crime and the rise of a standard of living. The poorest countries in the world and regions in the Philippines also correspondingly have the highest crime and drug dependency rates. So what is happening, if there's somewhat relative safety, if ever, that is artificial public order and safety. Genuine public order and safety is dependent on decent living conditions for all, not a climate of fear or repression. Yeah, solutions put forward by the human rights movement and the left, no? As progressives, most of us understand that clamped down, prohibitionist, violent approach, the war on drugs never worked elsewhere. Only made things worse. So you do have effective, sustainable, evidence-based, human rights-centered, and health-based responses. No, some of you may know the harm reduction strategy. I know I'm connecting with Harm Reduction Australia. I'm going to meet with them. And of course, reforms in our inoperable criminal justice system. And of course, addressing the root cause, structural change, investing in a life of dignity, and ending the poverty-inducing system in the Philippines, which is, of course, addressing the root cause. President Duterte has recently said, you human rights people, you're obstructionist to justice, you're only good at condemning, but you are not putting forward proposals. But we've been doing so since day one, and we know that this reaches him. So it's, of course, just another way to mislead the public. So challenges in holding perpetrators to account. So currently in the Philippines, all Philippine institutions, except for the Human Rights Commission and our Ombudsperson's office, have become co-opted. No? So there is no independent investigative agency. It's difficult to protect families of victims of extrajudicial killings and witnesses. Our witness protection program connected to our Department of Justice, which is headed, the Secretary, Aguirre, is the biggest apologist of President Duterte. So they're either silenced or compromised, definitely unable and unwilling institutions. There has been a case filed at the International Criminal Court, but we all know how difficult that is, threshold being high. But we stand by our view and confident that these killings have amounted to that threshold, crimes against humanity. And of course, he's attacked UN special rapporteurs. And yeah, these are of course the best chance of holding this president and other officials to account is through investigations by the UN. And further down the road, of course, possibility is are also independent civil society-led through commissions, but I'll go back to that later on. Okay, and this is what he said with respect to a case filed against him. No? So he says, in the first place, I'd like to be frank with you. Are they humans? What is your definition of a human being? No. Hitler said the Jews were subhuman. He's saying that drug dependents are inhuman. Even likening himself to Hitler publicly. No? So, early on, he knew that human rights groups would be countering his method. And so what he did early on is discredit human rights values, ideals, and principles as obstacles to development. Distortion of the ideals, values, and principles, really active vilification of human rights defenders and the Commission on Human Rights, and sowing public discontent. So there is actually really ordinary citizens really angry with us back in the Philippines. And then, publicly threatening human rights defenders. First, threatening to harvest us together with drug dependents. He used that very word, harvest. Second is, the second time he threatened us was he threatened to behead us. And the most recent one is saying that if human rights defenders obstruct justice, shoot them. Telling the police. So again, that gives the police an explicit license to actually attack us. Okay, this is one of the things he said. No, the world will never be safe as long as these human rights groups are there to protect and side with criminals, murderers, rapists, drug pushers, smugglers, robbers, and thieves. It's important to say that Filipinos aren't quite aware of the difference between the responsibilities of public officials and of ordinary citizens. No, of course, the Commission on Human Rights and human rights groups actually respond to violations by the all-powerful state, while those who actually should respond to common crimes are our regular Philippine institutions. So Duterte is actually questioning, what is the Commission on Human Rights? What are you human rights groups doing with heinous crimes? Well, that is our responsibility, is actually to call your attention if you're not doing your job in terms of providing ordinary citizens justice, no? Through the institutions. If institutions do not work. But if, public officials should be the first ones to abide by the law and the last ones to break them. So you have a higher responsibility. Okay, so the challenge for the human rights community, it's enormous and unprecedented. How to help society reestablish our shared humanity, the respect for life, before things get much, much worse. Actions beyond the legal sphere, what we're mulling about. Of course, we're silently working with others who are working towards these remedies. No? And while we're threatened to be the next targets, we must persevere to fight apathy, the lack of support, widespread ignorance about what is happening, and misinformation, and to resist the dehumanization of drug users. We're now helping organize communities for the defense and resistance strategies, very practical things actually. defense systems, which have been used elsewhere, Latin America, to protect communities. The more organized communities are, the less the effects are of vigilante groups. Okay, so President Duterte has a well-oiled, well-financed propaganda machinery. Okay, Filipinos are amongst the top users of social media in the world. At least the middle class, Philippine middle class, no? And he has this propaganda machinery both offline, online, locally, internationally. I've encountered it in most countries that I have visited for the past 4 months. After he won, they actually deployed, Filipino migrant workers being an important base. They actually deployed propagandists there. So you have the rise of extremist nationalist groups all over the world where you have huge concentrations. You have in the US, and you have in Europe. I still have to encounter them here in Australia. But I hear from people that there are. So, then the narrative and attitude that they promote is that if you're against a particular program of Duterte, then you must be overall anti-Duterte. And if you are anti-Duterte, that means you're also part of the yellows. No? And this is the myth that we are really dispelling. No, that's not true. You have many which are not co-opted with the old system. And you are part of an orchestrated attack. So, in the Philippines, this propaganda machinery is effective in spreading half-truths, lies, and fake news. No? Government stations also, they actually deployed one of the undersecretaries, a pop star, and also the most popular blogger in the Philippines. They put as undersecretary of the Philippine News Agency, Mocha Yuson. So these are call center type outfits, actually. One that we know of are 500 well-paid full-time employees doing 3 8-hour shifts. 3 8-hour shifts at the Bonifacio Global City, a financial district in the Philippines, and doing nothing else but doing propaganda work and monitoring online criticisms. So there's that hyper-inflated popularity. So I've been asked many times, why is he so popular? Okay, I've explained the 2 reasons, but then again, it's not that, the support is not that big. 16 million is not that big compared to 110 million Filipinos. So we presume that there is a large silent majority. Okay? This climate of fear that is effectively sown, the bullying of neighbors, of even families are torn apart. That's how divisive this Duterte concern is in the Philippines. And also he enjoys that support from the middle class because the design of the war on drugs is really limiting the violence, the killings in the most impoverished communities. So these are the unseen and unheard ones, those who do not have social media. That we are definite about this because we are at these very communities. Massive communities actually massively supporting Duterte during the elections have actually turned the other way around because they witnessed it firsthand. Okay, before the elections, fighting criminality was only the 7th, coupled with drugs, the 7th concern of the Filipino. Because of his crisis creation, has come at par actually as number 1 concern together with job creation in the Philippines. Yeah, so Dr. Walden Bello actually defines it as the middle class, ABC classes, as having active consensus. These are the most rabid ones. They're on social media, rabid supporters. But some also come from the DNA, providing passive consensus. So, a clear direction toward authoritarian rule. We're certain, very, very most certain about this. And the situation today is the closest to we have been to an authoritarian government since the Ellecer Revolution 30 years ago. He's relentlessly pursuing his track towards unfettered exercise of power, creation of a crisis and widening attempts to erode democratic space, civil liberties, and human rights is definitely a means to achieve absolute power. Martial law and suspension of the writ of habeas corpus in Mindanao is merely a dress rehearsal. He's just waiting for the right pretext to declare martial law nationwide. Okay? He's mentioned the intention to do so. Our largest national daily in the Philippines, also being attacked. The Philippine Daily Inquirer has counted him publicly saying it, the intention to declare martial law 35 times before it actually happened in May 24. Okay, so the breakdown of talks with the big left, Communist Party of the Philippines, the National Democratic Front, New People's Army, will of course further bolster Duterte's move towards militarist rule. Why? If a small group like the Maute in Marawi can actually justify the declaration of martial law in the entire Mindanao, roughly 1/3 or 1/4 of the population, 24 million. Definitely, if he goes all out war with the CPP, which has a nationwide structure, then that will definitely justify that nationwide declaration. And of course, now he has defined drug dependence, petty drug peddlers as the enemy, terrorists, and now the left. And of course, this will affect everyone working towards change. Those who work with the most basic sectors in the Philippines, all sorts of activists, including environmental defenders. They will all perceive everybody working towards change as being from the left. Okay, so do we have counterbalancing institutions left in the Philippines? You have a small national human rights institution fighting back, but that's all. And some sites of courage, of course, from opposition leaders which have been more or less silenced. You have super majorities in both chambers. As I mentioned, in the Philippines, there is no political party system. So everybody jumps ship and gravitates towards the most influential. So a small party like PDP Laban, Duterte's party, actually became super bloated. The largest party before, the Liberal Party, actually disintegrated, collapsed. You have a subservient Supreme Court, which allowed the burial of the late dictator Marcos at the Hero Cemetery because of Duterte's wanting. So government officials, and you do have kindred spirits in government, become either co-opted or have become victims of the climate of fear. You have patterns of layoffs if you're an official who does not toe the line. like the Dangerous Drugs Board chief, who actually provided correct figures of drug dependency in the Philippines, which was far from the bloated figure that Duterte was giving, and he was sacked because of that. Okay, so he's been stress testing our fragile Philippine democratic institutions and processes. An example would be the postponement of our barangay elections, no? The smallest political governance unit in the Philippines. And if you postpone that, he's saying that barangay officials, barangay captains most of them are involved in the drug trade. And so if you cannot trust them, then we now should appoint them instead of elect them, because being involved in the drug trade, they have the finances to actually pay their way into winning in the elections. So for now, we should appoint them. And now if he's going to appoint them, what happens? So you now have an entire electoral machinery for yourself in the coming 2019 and 2020 presidential and senatorial national elections. Okay, so the only Philippine group, no, that Duterte has not secured. He has secured all civilian political forces. Okay, the military is an entirely different animal. Okay, the armed forces of the Philippines is very subservient, very close with the U.S. Okay, that's his weak spot, and it's well organized and can actually resist Duterte. So they can fill the vacuum if he dies. The civilians cannot do it, then will take over. So similar to the situation in Thailand, that's a possible scenario. And also, yeah, if Duterte goes too far with respect to his pretensions of being anti-imperialist and saying he will sever ties with the US. Okay, so he's also militarizing the bureaucracy, appointing, the latest was 56 retired and active military officers into the bureaucracy. Yeah, so also channeling budgets from the basic services to the security forces, no? The intelligence budget increase 400% and so forth. Okay, so the top two priority legislations of President Duterte is the forceful reimposition of capital punishment, something that we painstakingly had abolished 10 years ago. So we became a state party to the second optional protocol to the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, and this actually threatens us to becoming the first state party to. There's no opt-outing exit clause in that treaty, but will be a very bad precedent, and he's pushing for that. So second is the lowering of the minimum age of criminal responsibility from 15 to 9 years old, the 9-year-old being a grade 3 student, not taking into account the dimension of poverty, that the 9-year-old living in an urban poor area would actually have an entirely worldview than a 9-year-old living in decent living conditions. So he can do that. So this has become popular in the Philippines, the killer congresspersons. No? The House leader and all his lackeys at the Philippine legislature, his minions. Just an important thing to note is that we are aware that most of our legislators in the Philippines are against capital punishment and the lowering of the minimum age of criminal responsibility. but there's such a thing called party discipline. So this is the first time that his cohorts in Congress actually resulted in threats, intimidation of their colleagues, threatening to remove projects, threatening to remove them from committee chairpersonships and so forth. And so our legislators could not vote based on their conscience. And so, 216 out of the 287 legislators in the Philippine House of Representatives actually voted in favor of capital punishment. So, disabling opposition, no? I don't know if some of you may have heard the imprisoned senator, Laila de Lima. Of course, she belongs to the Liberal Party, and she has no background in the left, but she has courageously confronted Duterte. And what they did was they took advantage of Filipino machismo, no? Actually demolishing her character publicly, just because she had an affair with her driver. It's a double standard. Duterte brags about his women, so it's a badge of honor if it's a man. If it's a woman, it's unacceptable. So basically, Senator de Lima is a victim of political persecution, and there's a purpose to it. If you can do that to a sitting senator, you can do that to a former Department of Justice Secretary, and you can do that to a former Commission on Human Rights chair, then you can do that to anyone who opposes you. So that's to send out a chilling message. No? President Duterte is also very fond of rape jokes, no? As you may have heard. It's very sad because during his speeches you'll hear his audience laughing. And that says a lot with respect to the compromise of core values among Filipinos. Okay, so whenever he needs to, he attacks and discredits various Philippine institutions like the media, independent media, journalists, the church. So there's that growing intolerance to criticism and opposition, and of course, he has publicly called President Obama a son of a bitch. He has lambasted the United Nations, the European Union, and of course, he's taking advantage of that distorted sense of patriotism. No? So Filipinos both actually love the United States, but at the same time, there's that self-pity feeling of having been oppressed. So he's taking advantage of that. So what happened to the third priority of President Duterte in terms of corruption? I only have two things to say about that. Okay, he has pardoned former President Gloria Macapagal Arroyo, the biggest plunderer after Marcos. Okay, scot-free now. And he is responsible for historical revisionism in the Philippines, distorting what really happened during the Marcos dictatorship. Having close ties with the Marcoses, and actually saying that what Marcos did was just what was needed, and so being complicit to what the Marcoses are doing, distorting Philippine history. No? Okay, so this guy, the son of Marcos, Bongbong Marcos, actually ran for the vice presidency. Now he's silently actually moving to remove our Vice President, Leni Robredo, actually. So the road to Malacanang, or Presidential Palace, for the Marcoses is not too far ahead, actually. Next slide, please. Okay, so these are Duterte's friends. Introducing his 3 friends, no? So he's cozying up to all of these people, claiming having an independent foreign policy. But what is it really? Okay, so Duterte has actually now borrowed more in 1 year than all the borrowings of the former president from China. Okay, what does this mean? So the Philippine outstanding debt as of June 2017 is $77.7 billion. No, there's that debt-driven development policy in the Philippines. So illegitimate debt cases, allowing politicians to actually have projects which are substandardly delivered or never take place, pocketing the money. So a Filipino who's not yet been born actually already owes money. So coming from the taxpayer. So debt servicing actually takes a toll on, spending on essential services. So what this will do also is that his loans will provide a buffer even with bad economic policies, no? Will provide a buffer for the next 5 years, or a cushion. So you will not feel the ill effects for quite some time. He has not asserted sovereignty from the U.S. as he has not abrogated the unequal security treaties. The relations continue with the U.S. while cultivating a warmer relations with Russia and China. Okay, so he also surrendered our right to our own territories in the West Philippine Sea, which we actually won in 2015 in the arbitrary tribunal, UNCLOS arbitrary tribunal in The Hague. No? So because he wants favors from China. Okay, charter change and federalism. President Duterte's solution actually to the situation in the Philippines and more in Mindanao is having a federal form of government instead of this current one. No? So it's opening up the Constitution, and they're going to do that next before the year ends. And this is what they've made public already. So the danger is, of course, the perpetuation of political patronage dynasties and local fiefdoms. They say power is centralized in Manila. No? So we must devolve power to the regions. But both at the local and national levels, you have centralized power. So you only strengthen the powers of political power, formalize the political power of local political dynasties and warlords in the Philippines. Okay, yes. Okay, so extension of terms of office of officials, lifting of nationalist economic provisions in the 1987 Constitution, open to 100% foreign ownership. Currently, it stands at 60% Filipino, 40% foreign. Okay, so he wants the Constitution, and he has said this explicitly, to be amended to scrap the provisions on congressional and judicial review, a safeguard for a martial law declaration. So allowing the president to actually directly declare it. So the abolition of, constitutional institutions like the Commission on Human Rights, it already started in Congress. There have been sessions actually now to abolish our Commission on Human Rights. Okay. So naked force, according to Dr. Walden Bello, is now the ruling principle in Philippine politics. He has shown that he can kill thousands of people and can get away with it. The rest, restricting civil liberties, assumption of dictatorial powers, will be a mopping up operation. Okay? So, we have observed that there are no signs of change that will actually impact the interests of the elite in the Philippines. Okay, other complications, as I've said, the mass movement, civil society is divided in the Philippines with some, I call them former progressives, those who left the movement, went into mainstream politics, lending legitimacy to Duterte. But they are in possession of those skills of the left, mass organizing. So, Duterte is actually employing them, actually putting in place through the Masa Masid. This is a community monitoring system for crime and drugs. No? And then also the movement for change, Kilusang Pagbabago, is this fascist mass movement that is being established with the use of government funds. Okay, and progressive forces are still divided in the treatment of Duterte. Some are for engage still, and like us, resist, defend, and oppose. Okay, so of course we must address the bleeding wound as we move forward towards structural change. How do we do this? And these are just several recommendations, is to help widen the circles of concern, both in the Philippines and abroad, raising awareness among Filipino communities, contribute to mindset shifts, take any form of action to put pressure on President. Stop the killings, incitement to violence, supporting frontline human rights groups, human rights defenders. How do we counter the narrative of attacks on human rights principles? Okay, very important, what never took place in the Philippines after the end of the Marcos dictatorship. No transitional justice, no truth commission. Style of former President Corazon Aquino was peace and reconciliation. So we now, when Duterte's reign ends, we must push for a truth commission. So that viable, sustainable, and responsive approach to the drug issue, drug policy reform. Challenges for the Philippine left and for all of us. Okay, a lot of us have come to see the situation as such that the Marcos dictatorship is not a separate episode from this Duterte juncture. It is actually a continuum and part of one epoch. No? And that all these issues, the martial law in Mindanao, the death policies, his different international policy, and these killings are all interconnected and programmed. No? Okay, so we must expose the duplicity of Duterte, who claims to be a socialist, first socialist president, but who has no programs for social justice, whose economic program explicitly says it will continue the neoliberal policies of his predecessors, and who now enjoys the support of nearly all sectors of the elite. Okay, multiplying and expanding sides of courage, resistance, and opposition by establishing a united front against the impending dictatorship. Okay, question is, the left being divided in the Philippines, the readiness of the left to provide alternatives and prevent representatives of the elite liberal democratic system from recapturing power. Otherwise, it'll be a vicious cycle. And how do we build the capacity to capture state power? By coming up with a clear political program that expounds our demands and aspirations as an independent force from the traditional elite political forces. And this I gathered from the messages, current messages of our leaders, Kasani Melencio from PLN and Dr. Walden Melencio.